Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be exploring something really fascinating. The intersection of physics and Eastern mysticism.
Oh, yeah. This is going to be fun. We're diving into Fritjof Capra's The Tao of Physics, a book that really kind of shakes up the way we usually think about the universe.
I've heard so much about this book. It's supposed to be mind-blowing.
It is. And you know what's really cool about Capra's work is it shows these unexpected connections between modern physics, like quantum theory and relativity,
Right.
and the core ideas of Eastern philosophies,
Yeah.
like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism.
So you're saying physicists and mystics from totally different worlds ended up with a similar understanding of the universe.
Exactly. It's like they were both looking at the same reality, but from different angles.
Yeah.
And they both arrived at some pretty profound insights.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so what are we going to be focusing on in this deep dive?
Well, we're going to try to uncover those aha moments that Capra reveals, where these two seemingly separate worlds of physics and Eastern thought actually converge.
I'm so ready for this. Where do we even begin?
Well, to really understand the revolution that modern physics brought about, we need to go back to the roots of classical physics, the Newtonian worldview.
Okay, the Newtonian worldview.
It's the framework most of us still operate from, even without realizing it.
You mean like the universe is a giant clockwork mechanism?
Exactly. Everything predictable and orderly. Like billiard balls bouncing around on a table.
Got it. So the universe is a perfectly predictable machine.
Precisely. That was the dominant view for centuries. The universe as a collection of solid, indestructible particles, moving in absolute space and time.
It all seems so straightforward.
Right. But then the 20th century rolls around, and physics takes a sharp turn with the arrival of quantum theory and relativity.
Okay, so that's where things start to get really interesting.
Right, and that's where our comfortable Newtonian worldview starts to crumble.
So what happened?
Well, just imagine this quantum theory introduces the idea of uncertainty, probability waves, and this crazy interconnectedness between the observer and the observer.
Okay, back up for a second. Uncertainty in physics. Isn't science supposed to be about finding definite answers?
That's what's so mind-blowing about quantum theory. It throws certainty out the window. Instead of precise measurements and predictions, we're dealing with possibilities and the role of consciousness in shaping reality.
So instead of a particle having a fixed location,
Yeah.
it's more like a cloud of possibilities.
Exactly. It's like the act of observing actually influences the outcome.
Wow. My mind is already starting to bend a little.
And hold on tight, because it gets even weirder when you bring in relativity, which challenges the very notion of absolute space and time.
Wait, so you're saying time isn't a constant?
That's precisely what Einstein showed. Space and time are not separate entities, but are woven together into this four-dimensional fabric that we call space-time.
Space-time, okay.
And this fabric can be warped and curved by gravity and speed.
So time can actually speed up or slow down. That's wild.
Yep. And it has some pretty profound implications for how we understand the universe and our place in it.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling a little disoriented. But how does all of this connect to Eastern mysticism? That seems like a completely different realm of thought.
That's where things get really fascinating. While Western science was busy constructing this mechanistic view of the universe, Eastern mystics were exploring a radically different perspective.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
They saw the universe as a manifestation of a single ultimate reality, a unified whole.
So instead of separate objects and forces, it's all one big interconnected thing.
Precisely. They saw beyond the illusion of separateness and recognized the underlying unity of all things.
Okay, that's a pretty profound idea. What do they call this ultimate reality?
It has different names in different traditions. In Hinduism, it's called Brahman. In Buddhism, Dharmakaya or Tathata. And in Taoism, it's the Tao.
So it's like they all had different words for the same concept.
Exactly. They were all pointing to the same fundamental truth, the oneness of all existence.
But hold on, isn't that just a spiritual belief? How does it relate to the hard science of physics?
That's a great question. And that's where Capra comes in. He does a brilliant job of showing how these mystical insights are actually echoed in the discoveries of modern physics.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me an example. Where do we see this overlap?
Take the concept of the dynamic nature of reality. Eastern mystics emphasize that this ultimate reality isn't static. It's a constant flow of creation and destruction, a never-ending dance of change.
So it's not about a fixed and unchanging universe, but a universe in constant motion.
Exactly. It's like a cosmic dance floor where everything is swirling and transforming.
Okay, I kind of like that image. So it's like physics is catching up to what the mystics have been saying for centuries.
You could say that. And this convergence becomes even more apparent when we look at specific examples of how physics echoes Eastern thought.
Okay, let's hear it. What are some of those parallels?
Well, one striking example is the concept of the unity of opposites. In quantum theory, the uncertainty principle shows that concepts like wave and particle, which seem contradictory, are actually complementary aspects of the same reality.
So it's not either, but both hand.
Exactly. And that's a core idea in Eastern philosophy, too. Take the Taoist concept of yin and yang, two seemingly opposite forces that are actually inseparable and always in a dynamic dance of balance.
That's amazing. So it's like physics is providing scientific evidence for what the mystics have been intuiting for ages.
You could say that. And that's just one example. Capra goes on to explore many other parallels, from the nature of emptiness to the role of consciousness in shaping reality. It's a mind-blowing journey that really challenges our assumptions about how the universe works.
I'm ready to dive in.
And get ready, because there's so much more to uncover. We'll be back with more mind-bending connections between physics and Eastern mysticism after the break.
Okay, so one of the most intriguing ideas Capra delves into is this thing called the bootstrap hypothesis.
Bootstrap hypothesis. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel. What's that all about?
Well, it's a pretty radical concept,
Yeah.
and it challenges the way we usually think about like the fundamental building blocks of reality.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Yeah.
The bootstrap hypothesis basically says that there are no fundamental building blocks of matter, like at all.
Wait, what? So there are no like ultimate particles that everything else is made of?
According to this theory, no, there isn't. It's like saying there's no bottom to the rabbit hole.
So where does everything come from then?
Well, instead of these fundamental particles, the bootstrap hypothesis suggests that all particles arise from their relationships with each other.
Okay, now you're really blowing my mind. How can everything be interconnected without any kind of starting point?
I know it sounds kind of paradoxical, but think of it this way. It's like a self-creating tapestry, where each thread gets its identity and its properties from its connection to all the other threads.
So it's not about what things are made of, but how they relate to each other. That's a pretty wild way of looking at things.
It is, but it actually resonates with a lot of Eastern mystical thought, which also emphasizes this interconnectedness of all things.
You know, as we're going deeper into all of this, I'm realizing how both physics and Eastern mysticism seem to struggle with language.
Yeah.
Like, how do you even describe something that's so far beyond our everyday experience?
That's a great observation. Both physicists and mystics have always bumped up against the limits of language when trying to convey the nature of reality.
It's like trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who's never tasted it before. Words just don't seem to do it justice.
Exactly. And they both kind of come up with their own strategies for dealing with this challenge.
So what do?
Well, Eastern mystics often turn to things like myths and metaphors, poetry cones.
Oh yeah, those Zen cones. Like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? They always make my brain hurt.
Right, but that's kind of the point. They're designed to break down our logical thinking
Right.
and open us up to a more direct experience of reality.
It's like they're trying to point beyond language to a truth that can only be grasped intuitively.
Exactly. And in a way, physics does something similar. Scientists acknowledge that their theories and models are ultimately just approximations of reality.
So they're always refining their language, trying to come up with new ways to describe the indescribable.
It's an ongoing process. And it's not just about words, it's also about experience.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for physicists, it's about grounding their theories in experiments and observations.
They need to check if their maps match the territory.
Exactly. And for Eastern mystics, it's about direct mystical experience. It's about transcending the limitations of language and thought to directly experience the interconnectedness of reality.
So it's not just about thinking about these concepts, but actually feeling them, living them.
Exactly. And that's what gives both fields their power. They're not just abstract theories. They're rooted in direct experience.
This is really making me rethink my whole understanding of physics and Eastern mysticism.
Yeah.
It's like they're both on this quest to uncover the truth about reality, but using different approaches.
And they both have a lot to teach us about the nature of ourselves and the universe.
But let's be real for a second. All of this is pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But how does it actually affect our lives here and now?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that both physics and Eastern mysticism invite us to contemplate.
Okay. So how do we bridge the gap between these big ideas and our everyday lives?
Well, one key takeaway is a shift in how we understand ourselves
Yeah.
and our relationship to the world around us. You see, the Newtonian worldview kind of promotes this sense of separation, We see ourselves as independent beings, separate from each other and the environment.
Like we're all just living in our own little bubbles.
Exactly. But both modern physics and Eastern mysticism suggest something much more interconnected, more like we're all part of this vast cosmic web.
Okay. So instead of separate bubbles, it's more like we're all threads in this giant tapestry.
I like that. We're not isolated individuals, but part of this vast interdependent web of relationships.
Okay, I can see how that might change how we relate to other people and the world around us.
Yeah.
But can you give me a specific example? Like, how does this play out in our daily lives?
Sure. Take the concept of emptiness. Eastern mystics view emptiness not as a void, but as a state of pure potentiality. It's the ground from which everything arises.
So you're saying we all have this infinite well of possibility inside of us.
Exactly. And interestingly, quantum physics supports this view as well. Quantum field theory shows that even the so-called vacuum is actually teeming with virtual particles popping in and out of existence. It's a dynamic field of pure potential, just like the mystics describe.
So it's like even at the most fundamental level, reality is this constantly shifting sea of possibilities.
Exactly. And that means that we're not just passive observers of the world, we're active participants in its creation.
Whoa. So you're saying we have the power to shape our own reality.
In a way, yes. And that's not just some new age mumbo-jumbo. It's a concept that's supported by both modern physics and Eastern mysticism.
That's pretty empowering. But if everything is interconnected,
Yeah.
how do we even begin to comprehend that? It's just so vast.
It is a huge shift in perspective, and it doesn't happen overnight. But both physics and Eastern mysticism emphasize the importance of direct experience. It's not just about thinking about these concepts, but actually feeling them, living them.
So how do we do that? How do we actually connect with this interconnectedness?
There are many paths you could explore. Meditation is one way to quiet the mind and become more aware of the subtle interconnectedness of everything. Spending time in nature is another way to tune into those rhythms and cycles of the universe.
I can see how those practices could help us cultivate a sense of interconnectedness.
And remember, there's no one right answer or a perfect way to do it. It's about being open to new experiences, asking questions, and exploring different ways of seeing the world.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling like my perspective has shifted just from this conversation.
And that's really just the beginning. There's so much more to explore at this intersection of physics and Eastern mysticism.
So where do we go from here in our exploration?
Well, one of the most fascinating concepts Capra explores is this idea of dynamic balance. It's a concept that's central to a lot of Eastern philosophies, and it turns out it has some surprising parallels in modern physics as well.
Dynamic balance. Okay, I'm
Oh.
ready to dive into that. Dynamic balance.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about how that works.
Well, in Eastern philosophy, dynamic balance is all about the interplay of opposites. Like, think about that yin and yang symbol. It's not about one side winning out over the other,
Right.
but about those two forces coexisting in a state of harmony, a dynamic harmony.
So it's like a constant dance between these opposing forces, like always pushing and pulling,
Hmm.
but ultimately creating a kind of equilibrium.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is that we see a similar principle at work in modern physics. Like if you look at particles and antiparticles,
Particles and antiparticles.
they have opposite charges, but they're also like totally interconnected.
So they kind of need each other to exist.
Yeah, exactly. And when a particle and its antiparticle meet, they annihilate each other, releasing a huge burst of energy.
Wow.
It's a pretty dramatic illustration of how opposites can both create and destroy.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this dynamic balance thing works on like a cosmic level
Mm.
and a subatomic level. But what about us as humans? I mean, it's not like we're particles and antiparticles colliding all the time.
Right. But the principle of dynamic balance is still relevant to our human experience. Like, think about it. Our lives are full of opposites, joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss.
Yeah, life definitely has its ups and downs.
And the point isn't to try to eliminate one side or the other, It's not about getting rid of the bad stuff and only having the good stuff.
Right.
It's about finding a way to hold those opposites in a state of balance, recognizing that they're both part of the whole.
So we need to embrace the full spectrum of human experience.
Exactly. The good, the bad, the ugly. It's all part of what makes life so rich
Yeah.
and so meaningful.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. So instead of trying to resist the difficult times,
Right.
we should try to learn from them and
Yeah.
grow from them.
Yeah, exactly. And remember that even the good times won't last forever. Change is inevitable.
It's all about finding that equilibrium point, that sweet spot where we can ride the waves of life without getting completely swept away.
I like that analogy. And that's really what both physics and Eastern mysticism are pointing toward. A universe that's in constant flux, but ultimately harmonious. Everything interconnected, participating in this intricate dance of existence.
This whole deep dive has been incredible. It's like you've given me a whole new set of lenses to see the world through.
That's what it's all about. Expanding our perspectives, challenging our assumptions, and ultimately coming to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe we live in.
I'm definitely feeling a sense of awe and wonder right now.
That's great to hear.
But before we wrap up, I have one last question. What can our listeners do to continue this exploration? Where do we go from here?
That's a great question. And the answer is simple. Keep exploring. There are so many paths you can take. Read more books on physics, Eastern philosophy, or books like Capra's that explore the connections between the two.
I'm adding those to my reading list right now.
And don't just stick to reading. Explore different meditation techniques. Spend time in nature. Talk to people who have different perspectives than you. The key is to stay curious. Keep asking questions and never stop exploring.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much for taking us on this incredible journey through the Tao of physics.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep those minds open and keep exploring the mysteries of the universe. We'll see you next time.